For years, the royal household believed every personal message written by the late Queen had been archived, catalogued, and sealed away under the strictest protections. But when a forgotten drawer was opened inside Princess Anne's private quarters during a routine restoration, everything changed. Hidden beneath old envelopes and fading stationery was a single handwritten letter in the Queen's unmistakable script, a letter addressed to Anne alone. And what it contained was powerful enough to summon her home immediately. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What followed in the minutes after this discovery would quietly shift the atmosphere within the palace, as though the walls themselves understood the weight of what had been found. The restoration team had been going through old furniture, reorganizing documents that had gathered dust for decades. It was ordinary work routine, predictable, uneventful, until an assistant pulled open a drawer that should have been empty. Instead, they froze at the sight of something tucked deep in the corner, wrapped in paper that had aged into a pale, brittle whisper of its original color. At first, they thought it was just another forgotten note, perhaps one of Anne's old reminders or letters from early in her royal life. But the moment they recognized the handwriting, everything inside the room shifted. The Queen's script was unmistakable, precise, balanced, and almost impossibly familiar. Whispers spread among the staff instantly, not out of curiosity but out of genuine fear. If the letter had been overlooked for so long, they worried it might contain information the family had never intended to surface. The date only fueled their alarm. It didn't match any known archive entry, and it appeared to have been written during a time marked by heavy strain within the monarchy. The envelope itself was sealed tightly, almost defiantly, and the words scrawled across the front carried a weight that silenced every voice in the room. Private for Anne's eyes only. It wasn't merely a message, it was a directive, a boundary, a warning that whatever the Queen had written was never meant for anyone else. The staff immediately contacted their superior, who issued a strict hush order. No one was allowed to mention the letter, not even in passing. They understood that if word leaked before Anne arrived, it could ignite speculation capable of outrunning the truth in mere hours. The palace had managed crises before, but a private letter written by the Queen, discovered after her death, was something entirely different. It held the potential to reshape narratives, reopen old wounds, or expose matters carefully contained for years. As the envelope was secured and placed in a confidential holding room, one thought lingered heavily among those who witnessed the discovery. If the Queen had intended for Anne to find this only after she was gone, then whatever was inside might reveal a burden she had carried alone. But what Anne would discover inside that envelope was far more than a private message, because the Queen wrote it knowing it would only be found after her death. When Princess Anne received the urgent call, she didn't hesitate. She cancelled engagements, instructed her team to reveal nothing to anyone, and travelled under a discreet escort back to Windsor. Staff described her expression as controlled but deeply shaken. Something inside that letter had rattled her, and the journey home was only the beginning of a revelation she had apparently feared for years. From the moment she ended the call, her instructions were clear, sharp, and uttered with a sense of urgency that startled even those who had worked beside her for decades. Her team was ordered to remain absolutely silent about her sudden disappearance from public duties, not even hinting at the reason behind her abrupt return. It wasn't just secrecy, it was protection, as if Anne believed that any whisper of this discovery could set off a chain reaction she wasn't ready to face. And as she moved toward her waiting escort, her body language betrayed the storm inside her. She carried herself with the same resolute conviction that had defined her entire life. But beneath the surface, something deeper stirred an unspoken dread she had buried for years. It was the kind of heaviness that comes not from shock alone, but from recognition, from an instinctive understanding that the past had finally circled back. The immediate decision to travel through private routes, avoiding any vantage point where cameras or curious eyes could track her movements, added even more gravity to her return. This wasn't a royal adjusting her schedule. This was a daughter responding to a message her mother had crafted with intention and foresight. a message she had somehow known would one day resurface. And as the car moved closer to Windsor, conflicting emotions churned within her, duty pushing her forward, dread tightening around her chest, and loyalty unyielding, fierce guiding every step. She understood better than anyone that the Queen never wrote without purpose. Every word carried weight. Every silence carried even more. So if a letter had been hidden, preserved, and addressed only to her, then the truth inside it would not be gentle. Back at the palace, preparations were already underway. A sealed private room was arranged, cleared of unnecessary staff and secured against any unintended intrusion. The atmosphere thickened as whispers began spreading among those who sensed something extraordinary had shifted. Servants exchanged quick glances. Advisors stayed close to their phones. The quiet tension creeping through the corridors hinted that they all knew without knowing anything that this was far from a simple family matter. And the closer Anne came to the palace gates, the more the weight of the situation pressed against her, as though the truth she was about to confront had been waiting with its own heartbeat. She walked inside with the solemn understanding that whatever the Queen had left for her was never meant to stay contained, because its implications reached far beyond her own life. Yet Anne knew she couldn't face the contents alone because the letter hinted at a secret that involved far more than her. The moment Anne broke the seal, she understood why the Queen had hidden it. The handwriting was steady, but the message inside was anything but calm. The Queen spoke of shifting alliances, unseen threats, and a crisis she believed would unfold long after her passing. It wasn't a farewell. It was a warning one. The Queen had been too cautious, too controlled, too politically restrained to share during her lifetime. As Anne read the opening lines, a quiet chill settled over her, not because the words were unexpected, but because they echoed a fear she had sensed in her mother during those final years, a tension the Queen had never allowed to surface publicly. The letter revealed that the Queen, even at the height of her influence, had foreseen instability inching toward the monarchy like a slow-moving shadow, gathering momentum beneath the surface of carefully managed appearances. She wrote of individuals she could no longer fully trust, people positioned so close to the heart of the institution that doubting them felt like doubting the monarchy itself. The Queen refused to name them outright in the opening paragraphs, but Anne could tell the list existed people whose loyalties had become blurred by ambition, resentment, or hidden motives. And with every sentence, Anne felt the weight of responsibility pressing harder against her chest, as though the Queen had passed her a torch she never asked to carry. The letter shifted tone abruptly, moving from caution to confession, revealing that in her final years the Queen had taken discreet actions to shield the crown from internal fractures no outsider would have ever detected. She alluded to conversations, decisions, and interventions that had been made quietly, strategically, and with profound emotional cost. There were hints of unfinished business as well, tasks the Queen had set in motion but had been unable to complete, not for lack of determination, but because time had run out. And through it all, Anne realized her mother hadn't written this message to any counsel or advisor. She had written it to the one person she believed would act without self-interest, without political maneuvering, without fear of backlash. Anne wasn't being informed. She was being prepared. The Queen saw her as the last line of defense, the only one who would make the difficult choices if chaos ever threatened the monarchy's core. And beneath the formal tone, Anne could feel the tremor of regret her mother had carried this burden alone, knowing the storm would break long after she was gone. The letter hinted that the true danger wasn't external at all, but hidden in plain sight, nestled inside the palace walls, waiting for the right moment to ignite a crisis no one would see coming until it was too late. But the most shocking part wasn't the warning itself. It was the name the Queen singled out as the potential trigger of a coming crisis. Buried halfway down the page, just when Anne thought the letter's danger had reached its peak, the Queen wrote a single name. One individual whose influence, ambition, or silence, according to the Queen, could either stabilize the monarchy or tear it apart from within. And as Anne read it, her hand reportedly trembled. It wasn't a distant politician. It wasn't a foreign threat. It was someone shockingly close to the crown. The shift in the Queen's tone was unmistakable. The The steady composure in the earlier paragraphs sharpened into something urgent, almost forceful, as though she feared this name would be misunderstood or dismissed, unless she made its significance impossible to ignore. This person belonged to the inner royal circle, someone Anne had worked beside, spoken to, defended, even trusted. The realization hit her with the kind of force that knocks the breath out of a person, not because she believed the Queen was wrong, but because deep down she recognized the truth she had spent years trying not to see. The Queen's words painted a portrait of growing influence, subtle manipulation, and a quiet hunger for power that had slipped beneath public scrutiny but had not escaped her mother's watchful eye. She wrote of decisions made without consultation, of alliances formed discreetly, and of a rising confidence that the Queen feared was rooted not in service, but in ambition. And while Anne had witnessed glimpses of this behavior, she had always dismissed them as stress, timing, or coincidence. To see them now laid out with such clarity made her pulse quicken with both fear and responsibility. Didn't merely caution her, she urged her. Act decisively, even against your instincts, the letter read, a line that struck Anne with an almost physical weight. Her instinct had always been to protect the family, to maintain unity at all costs, to avoid conflict unless absolutely necessary. But her mother was telling her that unity could no longer be preserved through silence, that loyalty could not mean blindness, and that this specific individual posed a threat capable of rupturing the monarchy from within. Anne felt the emotional conflict surge, torn between the affection she carried for this person and the obligation she had been handed. The Queen was asking her to confront a storm she had never wanted to acknowledge, let alone face directly. And slowly, the truth settled into place. The responsibility did not fall on the king, nor the advisors, nor the public-facing royals who relied on scripted appearances. It fell on her and her alone. She was the one the Queen trusted to address the danger before it spiraled into something irreversible, something that could upend the stability the monarchy had fought to maintain for generations. Everything the Queen had written now formed a single, chilling conclusion. This confrontation was not optional. It was inevitable. And yet, the name was only the beginning because the Queen attached a second, smaller note meant to be read last. Folded tightly inside the letter was a smaller piece of paper, less formal, scribbled, almost hesitant. This one felt like the Queen writing not as a monarch, but as a mother. It carried a confession she never intended to voice while alive. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about strategy. It was about regret. And the one moment she believed changed the royal family's fate forever. The moment Anne unfolded the second note, she could immediately sense the dramatic shift in tone. Gone was the carefully measured authority, the deliberate caution that shaped every public word her mother had spoken. In its place was something fragile, painfully honest, almost trembling beneath the weight of years of silence. The Queen admitted that she had been haunted by a single decision made long ago, a decision she had justified at the time as necessary for the crown, yet had come to see as the very root of the instability now threatening her family. She confessed that her silence may have protected the monarchy in its most vulnerable moment, but that same silence had left the people she loved exposed to consequences she could never undo. She wrote that no advisors knew the truth, no officials had been told, because she believed revealing it then would have ignited conflicts she was desperate to avoid. So she carried it alone, convinced she could outrun the damage. But age had shifted her perspective, and toward the end of her reign, she realized that the past does not stay buried simply because a queen wills it to. And in the rawest line of the entire note, she admitted she wanted Anne, above all others, to know the truth when the moment was right, hoping Anne would someday understand why she made choices that seemed uncharacteristic or harsh. As Anne continued reading, her breath caught when she saw the confession tie directly to the same individual named in the first letter. The Queen acknowledged that she had misjudged this person years earlier, and that her attempt to shield them, whether from scandal, scrutiny, or accountability, had set into motion a pattern of behavior she could no longer control. She admitted this individual's rise had been fueled not only by their own ambition, but by her own reluctance to confront the truth when it mattered most. The realization struck Anne with devastating clarity. Her mother had lived with the burden of knowing she had unintentionally empowered the very force she now feared, and Anne felt her world tilt, not out of anger, but out of the painful understanding that even a queen, her mother, the most disciplined and composed woman she had ever known, could look back and wish she had acted differently. It shattered Anne's belief that the queen had always been unshakably certain, revealing instead a woman who had quietly suffered under the weight of her own regrets. The note left Anne shaken, seeing her mother not as the untouchable pillar the world revered, but as a human being who feared she had set her daughter up for a battle she never wanted her to fight. But before Anne could process the emotions, she noticed something else sealed beneath the note, a directive the Queen had clearly meant as her final instruction. The Queen rarely issued personal directives outside official channels, but this one was unmistakably deliberate. Written in firmer strokes, the note laid out a plan the Queen knew would be controversial, destabilizing, and impossible to ignore. She asked Anne to undertake a mission, one that would require secrecy, confrontation, and courage. It was a directive that the Queen believed only Anne could execute without hesitation. As Anne read the new set of instructions, the tone shifted again from emotional confession to commanding urgency, as though the Queen had stepped back into her role not merely as a mother seeking absolution, but as a sovereign preparing her most trusted daughter for a storm she had foreseen long before anyone else sensed its approach. The directive began with an explicit order. Anne was to quietly monitor specific royal activities that had, in the Queen's view, strayed dangerously from their original purpose. Meetings that should have been transparent had become concealed. Decisions that should have been collective were suddenly being made in tight, exclusionary circles. The Queen warned that subtle manipulation had crept into the institution, shaping outcomes in ways that served private ambition rather than the monarchy's stability. And Anne, reading each line, realized this was no speculative worry her mother spoke with. Certainty born from evidence she had quietly gathered, truths she had protected even as they weighed heavily on her conscience. The Queen urged Anne to restore a balance she feared was slipping. A balance she knew could not be preserved unless someone with unwavering loyalty, clear judgment, and unbreakable resolve stepped into the center of the crisis. She wrote that timing would be everything. Waiting too long would allow certain individuals to consolidate their influence. Acting too soon could fracture the institution beyond repair. Anne would need to move with precision, guided by instinct sharpened over decades of service, but also fortified with courage that refused to bend under pressure. The Queen warned that the individual named earlier, once shielded, now deeply entangled in the monarchy's shifting dynamics, had become the pivot point on which everything rested. Confronting them would not be simple, and it would not be without cost. Their reaction could trigger a cascade of consequences, forcing hidden tensions into the open. But the Queen was adamant. Anne had to address the issue before the tipping point, a phrase that lodged itself into Anne's mind like an echo she could not silence. Even as she read, she felt the heavy shift from revelation to responsibility. This was not simply information. It was a mission one carved out uniquely for her. One she had never sought, but now could not refuse without betraying everything her mother had believed about her strength. The Queen trusted her above all others, a trust that came with a weight Anne could feel tightening around her like a mantle she had never asked to wear. And as she reached the bottom of the directive, she sensed that her mother had left one final truth, something meant to anchor everything that came next, something she feared would change Anne's path forever. Anne now knew she had to act, but the Queen had left her one final chilling line that changed everything. At the very bottom of the Queen's final directive, almost hidden beneath the crease of the page, Anne found one final line, 8 words that froze her completely. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a request. It was a prophecy. A prediction the Queen believed would unfold sooner than anyone expects. And with those words, Anne understood that her mother had foreseen a crisis the rest of the family was still blind to. The revelation struck her with a force far greater than the name, the confession, or the directive itself. Those 8 words were not offered casually. They carried a gravity that stretched beyond the Queen's lifetime, suggesting that whatever storm she had anticipated was already forming. Anne felt her pulse quicken as she reread the line, hearing her mother's voice in every syllable. This wasn't speculation, it was certainty. The Queen had known that the shift within the monarchy was not approaching, it had begun. And Anne, who had always prided herself on reading undercurrents of royal life, realized painfully that she too had missed the signs. The Queen's prophecy transformed everything she had just learned from a future concern into an immediate threat. It felt like a countdown, each moment narrowing the window for Anne to act before events spiraled beyond her control. The emotional weight of it pressed onto her chest as she recognized the quiet fear her mother must have carried. For years, the Queen had shouldered this knowledge alone, choosing silence over alarm, diplomacy over confrontation, duty over vulnerability. And Anne could feel the ache of that isolation. It revealed a side of her mother that no one, not the public, not the advisors, not even the family, had ever truly seen. A queen who worried not about her legacy, but about the survival of the institution she had spent her entire life protecting. As the realization settled, Anne inhaled slowly, steadying herself as she understood that her next steps could not be tentative. She began mentally mapping what she needed to do, who she needed to watch, and how she could operate with absolute secrecy while under the wary eyes of a palace already buzzing with suspicion. Whispers of her sudden return were spreading quickly among senior royals. Questions were forming, motives were being dissected, and though none of them knew what had brought Anne home, they sensed something had shifted beneath the surface, something that made even seasoned figures uneasy. Anne knew she had no choice but to move quietly yet decisively, guided by the letter, the confession, the directive, and now this haunting prophecy that refused to loosen its grip on her thoughts. Every instinct urged her to tread carefully, but every word from her mother urged her to act boldly before the invisible deadline approached. But even with all this, Anne still had one last task, one that could either confirm the Queen's fears or unravel them entirely. With the letter in hand, and her mother's final directive echoing in her mind, Anne moved toward the inevitable, a direct confrontation with the very person the Queen had warned her about. She didn't call for a meeting, she didn't send a message, she went straight to them, determined to uncover the truth. What happened behind those closed doors remains heavily guarded, but sources say raised voices echoed down the corridor. As she entered the room, she requested total privacy, instructing staff to remain outside and ensure no one came near until she emerged. Her tone was firm, controlled, sharpened by the weight of the Queen's prophecy, and the individual she confronted knew instantly that this was not a conversation but an interrogation. Their initial reaction, shock followed by rapid defensiveness, confirmed more than they intended. Anne held the letter tightly, revealing only fragments of the Queen's words. Carefully chosen pieces meant not to expose her strategy but to test their response. And with every sentence she read, but aloud, she watched their face change. First confusion, then fear, then anger. The tension skyrocketed, filling the air like a storm about to break. Accusations circled the room, some spoken boldly, others delivered as thinly veiled remarks loaded with implication. Anne pushed for answers, unwilling to accept half-truths or vague explanations. The individual pushed back, denying certain claims while offering just enough honesty to reveal cracks in their composure. And beneath every clash of words, every sharp exchange, there was something deeper, simmering, a mutual awareness that this confrontation marked a turning point the Queen had foreseen long before either of them was ready to admit it. The argument grew more volatile as the stakes became undeniable. Anne demanded clarity about decisions made behind closed doors, alliances formed without transparency, and motives concealed beneath polished public appearances. Their responses were fragmented, defensive, and laced with frustration. It became clear that the confrontation would not end with tidy revelations or neat resolutions. Instead, it reached a breaking point, where both understood that nothing could return to the way it was. When Anne finally stepped back, her expression had hardened into the resolute calm she had inherited from her mother. The conversation remained unresolved, murky, tense, riddled with unanswered questions, but something fundamental had shifted. The individual knew they had been exposed, not fully, but enough for Anne to see the truth her mother had feared. And Anne understood with chilling clarity that this was only the beginning of the storm the Queen had predicted. The prophecy had not been a distant warning. It had been a map leading to this moment, a moment that would now ripple through the palace with consequences no one could suppress. And as Anne left the room, the palace realized something had shifted. The Queen's prophecy had begun. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.